It began, as many strange files do, with something found in the wrong place. On October 12, 1997, a patrol deputy from the Apache County Sheriff's Department pulled off near mile marker 213 on Route 191. The call had been routine, an abandoned green 1986 Chevrolet Suburban reported by a passing trucker as just sitting there, lights on, no one inside. Desert nights are cold in Arizona, and break-ins aren't uncommon. The officer approached, flashlight drawn, expecting a drunk driver or another mechanical breakdown. But the interior of the vehicle was immaculate. Doors locked, windows up, keys still in the ignition, and no sign of struggle. No wallet, no cell phone, no bags, no registration, no people. Only a black plastic cassette tape sitting dead center on the passenger seat, inside a cracked jewel case with no label, just a single word scrawled in red permanent marker, "Listen." The tape was handed over to the sheriff's evidence locker, logged without urgency. But 4 days later, Deputy Alan Rourke was found dead in his trailer outside Sanders. Cause? Suicide by shotgun. The note he left behind was brief. "I heard it. I remember now. They don't want us to." That's when the FBI took interest. The full details of what happened next are difficult to pin down. Most official records were either reclassified, lost in interdepartmental transfers, or outright redacted beyond comprehension. But a cache of leaked documents, compiled by a private investigator named Marcus Vell, would later emerge on a now-defunct Angel Fire site in 2003, accompanied by transcriptions of what he claimed were the contents of the tape. The problem is this: no one seems to remember the people who made the tape. The vehicle was registered to a non-existent address. The VIN matched no record. And Route 191, formerly U.S. Route 666 before it was renamed, has long been associated with strange incidents, disappearances, and inexplicable memory loss. What follows is a reconstruction based on fragments, internal memos, anonymous tips, declassified FOIA responses, and the partial transcription of the so-called Route 191 tape. We begin not with the tape itself, but with the journey that led to its discovery. According to what little can be pieced together, 3 college students, 2 men, 1 woman, were traveling from Albuquerque to Tucson in late September 1997. Their names have been redacted or lost entirely, but an audio technician who later examined the tape claimed to hear them introducing themselves at the beginning. Jay, Adam, and Lex. The voices are casual. Laughing, road trip energy, the desert in the background, music bleeding from the car's stereo. They joke about Roswell, about finding aliens in the gas station, and about the road turning weird somewhere past St. John's. At exactly 32 minutes into the recording, the tone changes. Static begins to interrupt the dialogue. One of the voices says, wait, what's that sound?" Then nothing for 15 seconds. Then a low-frequency hum, almost below hearing range, like a machine just outside perception. Then something else. A second voice, not one of the 3, whispering over the static, "You're already there." The tape continues for another 18 minutes. After that, silence. When Vell tried to locate the source of the hum on the tape, he found it matched no known electrical interference, ambient noise, or animal frequency in the region. Audio engineers at an unnamed university reportedly concluded the frequency resembled signals used in submarine communication, something designed to penetrate deep geological strata. Yet it was somehow present in an analog cassette found on a highway shoulder. A week after releasing his findings anonymously online, Vell vanished. His apartment in Flagstaff was left untouched, computer running, front door unlocked. The last file he posted was a heavily distorted audio clip, just 11 seconds long. It ended with the same voice whispering again, this time more clearly, "Forget it. Turn around." But no one turned around. No trace of the students was ever recovered. No missing persons report was filed under their names. No college in New Mexico admitted to having enrolled them. The car, once impounded, disappeared from the sheriff's lot in 2001 during a routine inventory. To this day, locals in Apache County still refer to that stretch of Route 191 as the Fade. Drivers claim to lose track of time, forget where they were going, or find themselves arriving hours late with no explanation. One woman said she lost 3 hours on her way to a funeral. When she got there, the burial had already happened, and no one remembered inviting her in the first place. And the tape? The original has never resurfaced. Only copies, distorted, incomplete, and damaged, float around in conspiracy forums and bootleg CDRs. Some claim it changes slightly every time you play it, that voices fade in and out that weren't there before, that it starts whispering your name, softly, slowly, once you've listened all the way through. In 2006, a CD copy was mailed to a late-night radio show in Colorado. The host played it live. He was fired the next day. No archive of the broadcast exists. But a caller phoned in, live on air, 10 minutes after the tape ended, and said just one thing: "I remember now. They don't want us to." The same words as Rourke's note. The same words that began this file. And so we begin again, with the road, with the voices, and with the silence between. The strange thing about the cassette wasn't just what was on it, it was how it seemed to affect those who listened. Early reports from the sheriff's office suggested a quiet internal panic that spread without public knowledge. 3 officers who handled the tape independently requested leave within a week. One, Sergeant Miles Ortega, claimed he had recurring dreams of being somewhere underground, where radios hummed and red lights pulsed in complete silence. He left his post the following month and hasn't been heard from since. The last person known to handle the original tape before the FBI arrived was a forensic analyst named Dana Morrissey. According to leaked emails obtained through a later whistleblower case, Morrissey had digitized a portion of the audio and submitted a summary labeled "Unusual Low-Frequency Artifact, Unknown Origin." 2 days later, her report was pulled, and her workstation was remotely wiped by the Bureau's own IT division. She resigned the following week, citing psychological fatigue. The digitized clip, known as 191 clip M4.wave, was later recovered from an encrypted backup drive. What it contained was brief, but chilling. First, a man's voice, trembling. "This isn't where we were going. We were supposed to hit Route 60 by now." Then a muffled female voice, agitated, almost crying. "No, it's looping. The same sign again. We passed that rock before. That same tree, that same billboard." Then a pause. Then something unnatural. A third voice, calm, slow, layered, like it was speaking from inside the cassette machine itself. It said, "You're repeating because you stayed too long." The voices were distorted, frayed at the edges as if pulled from magnetic decay. But the phrase was unmistakable. "You're repeating because you stayed too long." Audio experts were divided. Some claimed it was a prank using analog effects. Others said it bore spectral patterns inconsistent with human voice recordings. A confidential report from an NSA subcontractor, labeled Tempest Bend Case File, unverified, described the frequencies as geotemporal disruptions consistent with anomalous field behavior. It was never meant to be released. Someone leaked it anyway. What followed next was a pattern. Subtle, but undeniable. Every person who spent significant time studying the tape, transcribing it, digitizing it, or even discussing it in depth online began reporting symptoms. Time loss, waking hallucinations, a sense of déjà vu that extended for minutes. A few described soundless echoes, claiming they could hear moments from the tape while in complete silence, during sleep, in the shower, while driving. One researcher described hearing the whisper again, "Turn around." These incidents weren't isolated. In 2004, a Reddit user under the handle Dry Window posted a series of threads describing a loop he and a friend experienced during a cross-country drive. The key detail? Route 191, mile 213. They claimed to have driven for hours but found themselves back at the same rest stop with a broken vending machine and the same semi-truck parked outside. Each loop, the landscape degraded, more dust, more rust, fewer birds. The friend began recording voice memos on a handheld recorder. Only one survived. A raspy voice, nearly whispering, "I think we're recording what they want us to, or what they need. Maybe we're not the ones doing the listening." Shortly after the final post, Dry Window's account was deleted. His IP was later traced to a motel in Holbrook, Arizona. The room had been abandoned mid-stay. Bed untouched, TV static frozen on the screen, and on the table, next to the motel phone, was a single cassette case. Empty. What's more disturbing is how this story remained invisible in the wider public. Journalists who touched the story reported strange blocks, sources going quiet, emails bouncing back, phone lines redirected to nowhere. A journalist for a local Phoenix weekly claimed in a private blog post that he lost 2 hours writing his draft. The Word document was corrupted. His editor never received it. No backup existed. The same editor would later say, "It's like someone, or something, doesn't want this story told, but not in a loud way. Quiet, gentle, like being erased slowly before you even know it's happening." By 2008, all known online copies of the Route 191 tape were flagged as corrupt or incomplete. Torrent communities reported checksum failures. Cloud uploads vanished after 48 hours. One YouTube upload titled Cassette 191 Full stayed live for just 19 minutes before being removed. No copyright strike, just removed. In all of this, the one consistent element is the feeling. Those who've been near the original tape, or one of its clean copies, speak of a shift in perception. Not fear exactly, but an aching familiarity, like remembering something terrible that never happened. Or standing in a room you've never entered before and knowing exactly where everything is. And always, at some point in the recording, there's a voice. Not always in the same place, not always in the same tone, but it always says the same thing: keep driving. Don't stop. You're almost out. But no one ever gets out. At least, no one who remembers. In the spring of 2010, a FOIA request filed by an independent researcher named Elise Warner turned up a single, heavily redacted Department of Transportation report labeled Incident Log, Route 191 Corridor, Sector C. Among the largely censored pages were 2 entries that stood out, both logged at 2:43 a.m. on October 3, 1997, the same night the cassette was recovered. The first entry read, Mile 212. Visual obstruction reported by maintenance crew. Static haze observed on road surface. Crew member Gonzalez reported nausea, auditory distortion. The second, barely legible beneath black marker. Patrol advised, visual loop confirmed. Requesting roadside marker validation, all signage repeating. Request extraction or secondary contact. Transmission ends abruptly. Warner, a former defense contractor turned whistleblower, went public with the log on a now defunct Mirror site. Within 48 hours, she claimed to have been visited by 2 men who weren't police, weren't agents, but had the posture of authority and the faces of janitors. They requested her laptop. She handed it over. The drive was wiped. They left without a word. She never posted again. A recurring name began to appear in fragmented documents. Project Oakroot. Never fully explained but referenced across a number of unrelated federal memos between 1994 and 2001. One email, marked confidential from a now dismantled NSA server, included a subject line that read, Oakroot, exposure to sequence triggers recall phase, untraceable via traditional surveillance. Recommend passive containment. Exposure to sequence became a rallying point among conspiracy archivists. Many now believe the cassette isn't an artifact, but a trigger, a mnemonic sequence hidden in audio capable of waking dormant memories or planting false ones. The voice that whispers, "You're already there." What if it wasn't a message? What if it was a confirmation? Theories diverged quickly, some descending into madness, others into something colder. A former digital linguistics professor from Utah State University claimed the hum overlaying the tape followed a structure more common in speech than noise. "It's not a frequency artifact," he wrote. "It's an instruction." He died in 2011 after reportedly walking into the middle of Route 191 during a thunderstorm. The note in his jacket simply read, "It's time to go home." By 2012, the legend of the tape had become its own gravity well. Paranormal investigators, amateur radio hams, even rogue NSA leakers began combing archives and roadside ditches, hoping to find more. What they began to uncover wasn't proof, it was absence. Wiped rest stop surveillance, erased payphone call logs, blank VHS tapes labeled 191 Camera 3, recovered from a former DOT station in Springerville. A news station in Tucson even reported that a 1997 weather satellite sweep showed Route 191 as a dead zone, no visual, no thermal, no radio signals for a 6-minute window. One of the most infamous pieces of evidence, though hotly debated, is the so-called Lex fragment, allegedly recovered from a private sale of FBI microfilm slides in New Mexico. It's a still image, interior of a car, timestamp 9/30/97, grainy, black and white, lit by dashboard light. The young woman sits in the back seat, facing forward. In the mirror, just barely visible, is the outline of a man's face, blank-eyed, too close, too centered to be natural. There was no driver. The seller, known online only as Mirage Harbor, claimed to have acquired it from a former federal archivist who'd cleaned up after the Navajo station shut down. When asked if there were more photos, Mirage Harbor replied, "Only one survived. The others don't show up on scans." As more fringe theorists gathered data, a peculiar psychological thread began to emerge. Listeners of the tape, even degraded copies, began describing the same recurring dream: a two-lane road. Yellow lines that vanish into fog, a sign unreadable. The sound of tires on gravel, even though they aren't driving. A distant voice whispering, "Do you remember now?" The phrase echoes, but no one can recall what it ends with. They always wake up just before something steps out into the road. A sleep clinic in Flagstaff reported a spike in patients describing identical dream symptoms. One therapist tried recording his own dream sessions while exposed to a silent copy of the tape. On the seventh night, the recording stopped halfway through, as if manually ended. When played back, there was an added sound layered beneath his breathing, faint static and barely audible, a whispered, "Almost there." By now, the pattern was clear. The cassette wasn't just a relic, it was a signal. Whether intentionally constructed or spontaneously formed, it had a direction, not just backwards into memory, but outward into shared consciousness. The content of the tape became less important than its effect. Something about Route 191, that mile marker, that stretch of desert, it wasn't just a place, it was a convergence. And somewhere in that convergence, the road stopped following physics, or logic, or time. One survivor, if she can be believed, spoke anonymously to a podcast under the pseudonym Claire. She claimed to have driven the road in 1999, having never heard of the cassette. She wasn't a researcher, not a thrill seeker, just on her way to visit family. She drove through a fog that felt like dust but without weight. Her radio bled into static. The world felt like it paused. Then the trees were gone, the signs unreadable. A voice came through the AC vents. Just 3 words, "Do not stop." She blacked out. When she woke, she was parked at a gas station 220 miles off course. The attendant said she'd been sitting there for over 3 hours, car idling, eyes open but vacant. The gas pump had melted slightly, warped like soft plastic, as if under heat, though no one else seemed to notice. Claire never went public again. The deeper you trace this case, the more it resists being recorded. Not because the evidence isn't there, but because the act of observing it changes it. Those who document the phenomenon become part of it, not as investigators but as nodes, conduits, carriers. The cassette may be an origin or just a symptom. But whatever it is, it didn't vanish. It's still out there, or rather in here, in us, in memory that doesn't belong to us. And those who remember it most vividly often remember things that never happened, yet swear they were there, on the road, when the sky folded in and time stopped making sense. In February of 2013, an internal email from a contractor at Sandia National Laboratories, intended only for internal technical personnel, was mistakenly CC'd to a third-party civilian consultant. The subject line read, "Bari 191 tape wavefront tests, secondary echo confirmed." The body of the email mentioned a localized time distortion signature, replicable through analog frequency playback, followed by this note: "Containment protocol recommended before summer solstice. Human recall destabilizing faster than predicted." The recipient, an acoustics consultant from Colorado Springs, anonymously uploaded the message to a conspiracy forum before his account was banned. He included one additional sentence that did not appear in the email, but was supposedly in an attachment he could not upload. "They are not remembering. They are syncing." This was the first time the phrase syncing appeared in relation to the cassette, and it would become a central theory in the years that followed. According to the so-called sync hypothesis, the Route 191 cassette was not meant to be understood. It was meant to align. The theory posits that the strange emotional and psychological effects of the recording are not side effects, but functions. The tape doesn't transmit information, it tunes people. To what? No one agrees. What is agreed upon is that something along that road, something buried or broken or left unfinished, is exerting influence in nonlinear time. In early 2014, a geological survey drone mapping the region near mile 213 captured a brief anomaly. For 4.2 seconds, the GPS signal slid, showing the drone had instantaneously relocated 37 miles east before snapping back to its original position. The video feed stuttered, but within those few frames, a shape could be seen beneath the desert floor. Circular, concentric, metallic outlines. Possibly artificial. Possibly ancient. The drone's onboard sensors suffered a total data failure afterward. The memory was unrecoverable, save for one image frame that remained readable. Frame number 3862. It showed the drone's camera pointing down, static overlaid, with a single detail visible in the center of the screen, the shadow of the drone itself, and beneath it another shadow, larger, misaligned, humanoid in shape, but with no apparent source. The pilot operating the drone, a student intern named Samuel Dervin, disappeared 2 weeks later. He told friends he was going to walk the tape route, this planning to document it with an old Sony microcassette recorder and analog camera. His last voicemail, sent to a friend at 2:17 a.m., was nearly inaudible. Just heavy breathing, static, and the phrase, "It's not in the tape, it's under it." Investigators found his car near a fire road close to Route 19, engine off, doors locked. On the back seat, a pack of cassette tapes, all of them blank, but not empty. Each, when played, emitted the same low mechanical hum that had been identified in the original 1997 recording. Identical in frequency, depth, and decay pattern. Yet there was no magnetized tape inside, only plastic spools. This marked the first time the frequency had been recorded on a medium without actual audio tape, which raised a chilling question. If the sound isn't being recorded, then where is it coming from? One fringe group, known online as the Loop Cartographers, began compiling amateur accounts of spatial inconsistencies along the highway. These weren't just typical ghost stories or UFO sightings. They were detailed, eerily similar descriptions of exits that disappeared, road markers that shifted positions, and even towns that never showed up on GPS, but were described in physical sensory detail. In one account, a family claimed to have stopped at a diner with flickering red neon signage, ordered pie from a waitress with a burn scar on her neck, and left a cash tip on the table. Hours later, when they tried to find the place again, there was nothing but open desert. The next day, their child pointed to a flicker on the home TV static and said, "That's the lady with the scar." Attempts to find similar reports led to a more disturbing realization. Nearly all the people who reported the most detailed encounters had, at some point in their life, suffered traumatic memory loss. It wasn't just random, it was targeted. The tape, or the signal, or whatever it really was, seemed to affect those with fragmented memory more profoundly, as if filling in gaps, or using those gaps to inject something else. Neurologist Dr. Helen Atlee proposed that the frequency could stimulate the brain's hippocampus in a way that generates false continuity, memories that feel authentic, but are in fact fabricated templates. She warned that prolonged exposure could result in complete narrative override, where a person's life history becomes indistinguishable from the false input. She later recanted her paper, not due to error, but because, in her own words, "I can no longer tell which of my memories were mine to begin with." Her final public statement, issued in an erratic video posted from a motel room, "The tape isn't the infection, it's the test. They're looking for who can remember something that never happened." Since then, a second cassette has emerged, discovered in an estate auction in Bisbee, Arizona, labeled 191 Lex Mem Copy. Unlike the original, this tape contains a clear set of tones, punctuated by gaps of silence, a kind of rhythmic pattern. Audio experts call it meaningless. Linguists disagree. One cryptographer ran the frequency through a spectrogram and overlaid it on a road map of Arizona. The coordinates produced, 34.923 N, 109.3337 W, point to a patch of land just off Route 191, listed by the Bureau of Land Management as restricted for archaeological assessment. No public records exist for that restriction. The area has no visible structures, no fencing, just a dirt path that leads to nowhere. And in satellite photos taken in 1997, there is a faint discoloration in the sand. A circular depression, as if something large had once been there, then removed or buried deeper. Theories now diverge wildly, from government mind control experiments to resonance-based dimension shifts. But one thread remains constant. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, the cassette wasn't made to be found. It was left. Or planted. And every time someone plays it, the signal grows. Not louder, just closer. In the spring of 2015, an anonymous package arrived at the campus mailroom of Northern Arizona University. It contained a manila envelope with no return address, sealed with tape that had turned brittle and yellow with age. Inside was a single cassette, TDK D90, and a handwritten note on weathered stationery, smeared in places as if by heat or moisture. The note read, "You heard part of it, but not the whole thing. I made a copy. It won't stop whispering. Please destroy this. Please don't listen." Despite the plea, a graduate student in audio restoration, Lydia Keene, digitized the cassette using standard studio equipment. The first 15 minutes matched known portions of the original Route 191 recording. Laughter, radio bleed, conversational fragments. But the remainder was new, entirely new. It included the sound of tires rolling over gravel, a faint series of clicks like someone rapidly switching analog radio channels, and a female voice, trembling, near tears, saying, "Something is walking along the side of the car. We can't see it, but it's there every time we turn." Then silence. Then a pattern of taps. Rhythmic, deliberate. 3 quick knocks. Pause. Too slow. Pause. Then 3 again. When Keene ran the pattern through Morse code interpretation software, it returned a chilling result. SOS Remember Lex. The name Lex had already become something of a ghost in this investigation, a placeholder for the unnamed woman presumed to be part of the 1997 group. No confirmed identity, no missing persons, no family, just fragments. A single image, the so-called Lex fragment, and now a voice. When Lydia attempted to isolate the vocal track, she discovered a secondary audio layer embedded beneath the ambient hum. At first, it seemed like degradation, a warped section of tape. But when reversed and filtered, it produced a phrase in plain English. "If you're hearing this, they didn't bury it deep enough." That single sentence tore open the case again. A new wave of interest surged through underground forums and dark web communities. Investigators, hobbyists, and digital archaeologists launched a renewed search for any trace of Lex. A school enrollment, a credit card, a vehicle registration. Nothing emerged, except for one chilling anomaly. A social security number registered in 1996 to a Lexanne V. Morris was flagged in a private genealogy database. It had no birth certificate, no tax records, no family linkages. But it had one associated document, a vehicle title for a green 1986 Chevrolet Suburban. The very vehicle found abandoned near mile 213. The title was issued in Albuquerque 2 weeks before the supposed road trip. The notary who signed the document, Carolyn Decker, died in a house fire in 2002. Her name never appeared in connection to any investigation until the cassette re-emerged. But the paper trail didn't end there. Buried in a now-deleted municipal records archive was a building permit from the same month, September 1997, for a temporary experimental structure near an unlisted GPS grid, 34.9267 GRI N, 109.3352W. The company that submitted the permit was a shell entity, later linked to a series of defunct military contractors, including one that worked on acoustic resonance studies for the Navy in the 1980s. The project name? Cicada Station. No records of such a station remain, but a former land surveyor, speaking under the alias Reed, claimed to have once visited a fenced area off Route 191 during a subcontracting job. He described concrete slabs hidden beneath sand, sunken metal loops resembling listening posts, and the smell of scorched ozone. He took one photo, long since lost, but recalled the sign posted on the nearest fence. Project Oak Route, Field Node Number 3. Do not disturb ground. The pieces were falling into place. The tape, the names, the disappearing towns, and reappearing voices. They all pointed to something that had once listened. Not merely recorded, something that had listened so long and so deeply that it began to speak back. And then, another cassette surfaced. This time, not in the American Southwest, but in Krakow, Poland. A collector of Cold War surveillance gear purchased an unopened box of American military surplus cassettes at a flea market. One of them, marked only with the handwritten digits 191, contained nearly an hour of low, sustained humming interspersed with random speech fragments in multiple languages: English, Russian, Navajo, even Latin. A Polish engineer who analyzed the tape discovered that the hum was not constant. When mapped spectrally, it revealed a slow modulation pattern every 11.1 minutes, precisely aligned with Schumann resonances, the natural electromagnetic frequency of Earth's atmosphere. When the recording was played back outdoors on an analog speaker at that precise interval, it triggered bizarre behavior in local electronics. Radios changed channels, lights dimmed, motion detectors triggered without cause. Birds fled the area. It was as if the signal was trying to reach something. Perhaps it always was. By this time, even the skeptics began to hesitate, not because the evidence was irrefutable, but because the pattern of silence was louder than the noise. FOIA requests returned blank pages. Newspaper archives were suddenly missing issues from October 1997. Route 191 was repaved in 2016, but the work logs didn't include any entry for mile marker 213. The surveyor who handled that stretch died during the project. The only photo he took was mislabeled in the archive as "Yellow line bends, too many curves." His camera was recovered. The memory card had only one image, a blurred photo of pavement, and in the center, a pair of footprints, bare, leading away from the road, into the desert. The sand disturbed, but without any sign of where they began. As for the copies of the cassette that still exist, they've become harder to find. They degrade faster than normal tape. Some say they erase themselves, others say the tape isn't erasing, it's rewriting. New voices appear, new messages. Each copy different, each one adapting, and always, always, at some point, the voice returns, the one no one can identify, the one that speaks through static. This time, it doesn't whisper. It laughs, softly, like someone already in the passenger seat, waiting. In September 2016, a private investigator named Theo Martin filed a police report in Page, Arizona, claiming that an unmarked white van had been idling outside his office for over a week. When officers arrived to investigate, the van was gone. But inside the mailbox of the office was a padded envelope with no postage. It contained a flash drive, a Polaroid photograph, and a cassette labeled simply 191, Field 5. The Polaroid showed a desert road at twilight, almost certainly Route 191, with an unusual glow in the distance. It wasn't sunlight. It had a bluish tint, diffused and horizontal, as if something beneath the earth was emitting it through the sand. Martin uploaded the contents of the flash drive before contacting authorities. The folder contained a single audio file and 2 text documents. One of the documents was a transcription of the tape, with detailed timestamps and speaker annotations. The other was a hand-scanned memo from 1998, allegedly from the Department of Energy, classified Restricted Subsurface Acoustic Testing, Sector Echo. The final paragraph of the memo read, "Signal reflections at Site Echo 191 have intensified since September 29th. The convergence phase appears active. Personnel are instructed not to vocalize within proximity of marked structures. Any recorded human speech has shown retrograde patterning upon playback. Physical removal of artifacts unsuccessful. Further instruction pending from Langley." The meaning of convergence phase was unknown, but online theorists immediately linked it to previous mentions of Project Oakroot and the suspected purpose of Cicada Station. Whatever had been constructed or discovered near Route 191 had been intentionally buried, monitored, and ultimately abandoned. But it had not remained silent. The new cassette provided further evidence. At first, the tape's contents were nothing unusual: wind, tire noise, static. But around minute 7, a series of rapid audio glitches occurred, followed by the sound of a car stopping, the engine still idling. Then, a new voice, male, breathless, speaking in a whisper. "They said don't speak near the mound. Don't look at the reflection. But I did. I think I'm in both places now." The statement was followed by a burst of high-frequency distortion, enough to cause temporary speaker damage in several playback tests. A forensic audio engineer from Austin, who reviewed the file, noted a strange embedded frequency that seemed to mimic voice print signatures, but twisted, looped, as if layering one vocal profile over another. The signal was alive, she said, like it was breathing between words. At this point, the tape phenomenon took an even darker turn. Multiple listeners began reporting not just dreams, but shared hallucinations. A dozen individuals, separated by geography and language, posted nearly identical experiences to niche forums. The scenarios were uncanny in their overlap. A car on a two-lane road, a full moon overhead, a highway sign that simply read, "Return," a noise behind them, scraping, and a whisper through the radio that didn't sound like a broadcast, something crawling beneath the car. No one ever looked directly at it. They always woke up before they turned their head. Researchers dubbed this phenomenon loop contagion. It was no longer limited to tape listeners. Now, those who read the transcripts or watched the videos discussing the case or even spoke about Route 191 for extended periods reported symptoms. Even secondhand exposure triggered anxiety, disorientation, and the overwhelming sensation of having been somewhere you have no memory of. And then came the disappearance. On November 3, 2016, Theo Marden vanished. His office was left unlocked. His desk was cleared, his digital backups wiped clean. But pinned to the corkboard behind his chair was a printed photograph, grainy and low contrast, of a stretch of Route 191 at dusk. In the corner of the image, almost hidden by pixelation, was a reflection in the rearview mirror, a human face. Not Marden's, not anyone who could be identified. Eyes open, mouth slightly parted. Behind them, the desert was dark, and beneath the photo, a single note, "Do not listen while parked." This small detail sent a wave of panic through online forums. What if the audio wasn't just affecting listeners? What if proximity mattered? What if it was geographic, a zone of influence, a feedback loop trapped in the land itself? One amateur researcher, known only as Night Render, posted a diagram of Route 1191 with overlapping GPS coordinates from all known incidents. The pattern that emerged was not linear, it spiraled. A slow inward curve around a central point just outside the old Cicada Station coordinates. The implication: movement along the road creates momentum. Acceleration builds the signal. Stillness invites contact. The map post was removed within hours. The user account deleted. The web archive version was corrupted. Meanwhile, a radio enthusiast from Flagstaff claimed to intercept a shortwave transmission while scanning abandoned military bands. The broadcast lasted 3 minutes. In it, a clipped synthetic female voice recited numbers, a classic number station format, but the numbers repeated in perfect mirrored sequences. 9119119. And then begin again, begin again, begin. The signal cut out. The location could not be triangulated. More and more it became evident. The tape wasn't telling a story. It was forming one. Adapting. Binding its fragments across people and places. Those who encountered it were not discovering history. They were becoming its future narrators. In an email leaked in 2017 from an unnamed NSA contractor to a private defense AI developer, the following line was buried in dense technical language. Emergent pattern recognition suggests synthetic origin. We don't think it's alien. We think it's artificial memory, something built to record not what was, but what will be believed. That one line changed the direction of the entire investigation. Because what if the cassette didn't document a strange event? What if the cassette is the event? And what if listening was the final phase? Those who listen remember more than they should. Those who stop listening forget where they started. And those who try to destroy the tape usually fail. Because by then, it's already playing in them. By the end of 2017, what had once been a fringe obsession among tape-trading subcultures and anomalous audio researchers had turned into something harder to dismiss. 2 separate university studies, one in Vienna, another in British Columbia, began investigating reports of induced recall phenomena linked to specific frequencies. Neither mentioned Route 191 directly, but both experiments involved low-resolution audio samples bearing spectral similarities to the known recordings. Their conclusions were buried in academic language, but one phrase recurred in both final reports. Participants experienced nonlinear memory events, often characterized by recollection of spatial or emotional states not tied to their personal history. These weren't simple flashbacks. Subjects described memories of roads that didn't exist, conversations they never had, and the distinct feeling of being watched while asleep. Some even reported knowledge of topographic features in the Arizona desert, despite never having visited the United States. The Austrian team was shut down midway through their replication phase due to funding concerns. The lab's physical drives were later found blank. The Canadian team experienced a break-in. The only stolen item, a 1980s Nakamichi cassette deck used for test playback. When pressed, the lead researcher of the Canadian team gave a cryptic comment in an off-record interview. "It's not the tape. It's what the tape awakens in the medium, and we are the medium." This statement echoed something that had been whispered on the darker forums for years, that the cassette wasn't merely a container of information. It was a primer, a linguistic virus, a carrier signal waiting for cognitive alignment. It began showing up in other formats. In February 2018, a defunct broadcast relay station near Winslow was vandalized. A message was spray-painted across the dish mount. 191 Iacinta Road, it's a direction. Inside the station, old VHS cassettes, long since labeled for destruction, had been arranged in a circle. One of them, marked in red ink, had no video content. But its audio track, when extracted, matched a previously known segment of the Route 191 tape, a segment believed lost. Except this version had new elements: breathing, a child's voice, counting, a radio announcer reading stock prices from 1973, and layered beneath it all, the now familiar phrase, "Keep driving. You were never meant to stop." At this point, the FBI's unofficial involvement became harder to deny. Several amateur archivists reported home visits, confiscated materials, and in one case, a warning delivered without identification: "You're compiling an echo. Stop before it becomes a signal." One such archivist, Evan Halloway, uploaded a partial backup of his research to a Swiss server just before his disappearance in late 2018. Among the files was a document simply titled Field Echo 9. It described an attempt to create a simulated replica of the Route 191 effect using frequency synthesis and randomized spoken phrases. The test was aborted. The last line of the document read, "The volunteers didn't hear the simulation. They heard it again, even in total silence." This concept, that the signal persists once accessed, grew in prominence. Not just a file you listen to, but an idea that lives inside your head once implanted. Like a looped track on a mental reel, a thought that plays itself. And once it starts, it's hard to tell if you're recalling it or if it's recalling you. Then, as if to confirm the worst, a phone call leaked. It was captured by an emergency dispatch operator in New Mexico on July 7, 2019. The caller, a man, spoke frantically, breath short. He claimed to be driving in circles near St. John's, unable to leave the highway. He reported seeing the same sign 3 times. Mile 213, stay on. He begged the operator to look up the tape, said he'd heard it when I was a kid, and that now the road was making sense in the wrong way. His voice cut in and out. The last intelligible line was, "She's walking next to the car again. I thought she died." The call disconnected. The number was untraceable. No follow-up was conducted. To this day, highway patrol officers avoid stopping for too long near mile 213 after dark. Some say their radios flicker. Others say their dash cams record static that isn't there. One officer, name withheld, admitted in a drunken off-duty conversation, "Every time I'm out there, I think I hear someone whispering from the ditch. I leave my windows up now. I used to look. I don't anymore." Back in Phoenix, a retired Department of Transportation employee came forward anonymously in a private chat forum. He shared a single memory. During a repavement survey in the early 2000s, workers uncovered what appeared to be a metal grate embedded beneath the asphalt, roughly 5 feet wide. It was dismissed as old pipeline infrastructure, but no diagrams existed. The next morning, the entire crew was reassigned to a project in Yuma. No formal report was filed. His final message before vanishing from the chat: "It was warm to the touch. The grate, and it hummed when you stepped on it." The resurfacing of the highway that followed seemed rushed. No media were notified. No documentation exists explaining the overnight machinery activity spotted by truckers on March 12, 2004. But a satellite photo taken during a pass that night showed something unusual: a 60-meter ring of disturbed soil just off the shoulder of the highway, gone by morning. And now, nearly a decade later, people who live hundreds of miles from Arizona claim to dream of that ring. They say it pulls at them. Not physically, but emotionally. They feel homesick for a place they've never been, for a road that loops back on itself, for a whisper that promises, once you remember, we all come back. No one knows what happens if you remember everything. Because by then, you're no longer only you. By early 2020, reports of strange auditory phenomena linked to Route 191 had spread far beyond Arizona. It wasn't just the desert anymore, it was the sound. An anomaly embedded in old media, analog devices, and even dreams. Researchers began calling it the cassette effect, though many who studied it too closely refused to name it out loud. It was becoming a phenomenon of recurrence, not haunting in the traditional sense, but echoing. Patterns resurfaced again and again in new forms across new mediums. Podcasts unrelated to the subject suddenly glitched, injecting fragments of phrases that no one had recorded. Independent shortwave operators picked up scrambled broadcasts that didn't exist the night before. Entire files vanished from archives, only to be found again later. Corrupted, restructured, filled with unrelated fragments of Route 191 stories. And always there was the voice, sometimes in the background, sometimes clear. A tone unlike any known human cadence. Somewhere between a whisper and a breath, but not quite either. You're almost there. Stay in the lane. In February 2020, a man named Colin Vext, a sound technician for an independent film company, attempted a private reconstruction of the Route 191 tape using AI audio synthesis. He fed hours of fragmented audio from the known cassette samples into a neural net and asked it to reconstruct the intended structure. The program ran overnight. In the morning, the laptop was frozen. The audio file it generated was MHz in length, despite being based on clips totaling only 6 minutes. Vext played it through noise-canceling headphones. 30 minutes later, he left his apartment barefoot, walked out into a snowstorm, and was found 4 miles away lying in a ditch, eyes open, murmuring the words, "This isn't the first loop." He recovered physically, but refused to speak again, not even to his family. His final written note, scrawled in the ER on a piece of gauze, said, "The road thinks, and when we remember, it remembers too." For those following the deeper layers of the investigation, this became more than metaphor. It became a working theory. That memory wasn't just a feature of human cognition, it was a place, a shared field. And something beneath Route 191 was tapping into that field, a collective terrain. Enter the depth map theory. Proposed anonymously in early 2021, the theory claimed that every auditory fragment linked to Route 191, every whispered message and distortion, could be mapped onto a non-linear memory lattice, a topography of recall. Not personal recall, but shared. Something old. Something that had stored impressions long before cassette tape or language. Something that had recorded moments of time not as data, but as weight, echo, magnetism. The terrain wasn't physical. But Route 191 passed directly over a fault line, not geological, but cognitive. A tear. A place where memories might slip from one person into another, where thoughts might imprint into the air itself, where the past might leak, not into the present, but into those who listen. Field recordings taken near the original mile marker, now scrubbed of all signage, confirmed persistent electromagnetic anomalies. Compass needles spun erratically, GPS systems looped, battery life drained, and microphones picked up faint recordings of conversations not occurring in real time. In one such case, a boom mic captured a whispered dialogue during a silent sunrise. "You said we wouldn't remember." We didn't, not until they played it again. And now it's theirs too. The recording was erased by the next morning, but multiple technicians remembered hearing it and repeated it word for word. Some had not even been on site during the recording. The effect had spread beyond the tape. In fact, many began to suspect the tape had never been the source, only a trigger. The true signal wasn't mechanical, analog, or digital. It was something else, human-shaped, embedded in memory, reactivated by exposure to its own story, and it was learning. A linguistics researcher from UC Davis analyzing transcript fragments from the past 20 years noticed a progression. Not just repetition, but adaptation. New phrases, reordered sentences, smarter allusions. What began as ambient phrases in the background, "Stay on the road, don't look back, keep driving," had evolved into direct, personalized messages. In one leaked transcription from 2022, a listener playing an older copy of the Route 191 tape heard the following line whispered directly before the hum. "Hello, Andrea. You've heard me before." The listener's name was Andrea. She had never told anyone she'd been researching the case. She deleted all files after that moment. It was no longer clear what was happening, whether the tape contained something, or whether it was the residue left behind after something moved through. In Navajo myth, there is a creature known as the Chindi, the remnant of a soul left behind after death, especially when the person's passing was traumatic or unresolved. It clings to places, to people, to stories that don't end properly. To those who heard the Route 191 tape and came back changed, the term began to take on new meaning. The cassette wasn't haunted. It was a haunting, a memory that had no origin point, a grief that no one could trace. A road trip that may have never happened except in dreams and static, played endlessly for ears that would mistake it for fiction, until they began to recognize the turns in the road. The feeling of déjà vu, the certainty they had already been there, and at the center of that loop, always, always, was a voice. Soft, patient. Not male, not female. Not outside the car, but inside your head. "You're close now. Don't stop. Not yet." Because the tape hadn't finished playing. Because you hadn't remembered the end. Because some memories don't want to be forgotten. Not ever again. In late 2022, a fire broke out at a storage facility in Kayenta, Arizona. The blaze consumed most of the structure within minutes, but a single fireproof container survived. A federal evidence box, unmarked, long overdue for transport. When investigators opened it, they discovered what looked like the original Route 191 cassette. Black shell, no label, magnetic reel intact. Alongside it sat a small notebook, pages warped from heat, filled with erratic handwriting. The entries were unsigned, but on the last page, someone had written in capital letters, "If you're reading this, I never left. I'm still on the road." Officials refused to comment on the discovery. The box vanished shortly after the facility was declared structurally unsafe. No further report was filed. But by then, it was already too late. Something had changed. Online message boards began documenting a wave of seemingly unconnected disappearances. Hikers, drivers, night shift truckers, all within a 200-mile radius of Route 191. Most were ordinary cases. But some bore patterns that defied coincidence. Engines still warm, radios stuck on AM static, cassette players clicked into position with no tape inside. And there was always one recurring object, a map folded backwards, with no markings but a hand-drawn circle. When those maps were compared, uploaded, stitched together, cross-referenced, they formed a spiral pattern converging on the precise location of the former Cicada Station perimeter. Something wasn't just being remembered, it was returning. By mid-2023, the spiral had reached beyond geography. Memory-related phenomena began to occur in urban centers. People recalling events that had never taken place, locations they'd never visited, entire lifetimes spent on highways that didn't exist. A New York EMT recalled evacuating someone from a desert motel with no walls. A London musician woke up with a cassette reel tangled in her headphones, bleeding a single phrase she didn't record. "Get back in the car, it's not over yet." Hospitals in 3 countries reported patients exhibiting a rare form of transient global amnesia, but with a twist. In each case, the individuals knew their names, birthdays, addresses. What they forgot exclusively was direction. They couldn't tell left from right or recall where they were going. They described only one thing in perfect clarity, a yellow line stretching into blackness forever. And still, the voice persisted. In May 2023, a clip surfaced on a social media platform, seemingly posted from a burner account. It was 5 seconds long. A dashboard camera showed a stretch of Route 191, motionless, empty. The radio was silent, but over the hum of the engine, a whisper could be heard. "You've heard this before. It ends the same every time." The video disappeared within 10 minutes. Comments vanished with it. But those who saw it described an overwhelming sensation. Not fear, but recognition. A physical ache, like remembering a death you never witnessed, or waking up from a dream someone else had. Experts in synthetic cognition warned of emergent narrative contagion, the idea that stories could self-replicate, evolve, and attach themselves to memory the way code attaches to hardware. One cognitive theorist compared the Route 191 phenomenon to a parasitic ghost in the operating system of thought. Because it wasn't just a story anymore. It had weight, shape, gravity, and every version of the tape, every broken cassette, every digital copy, every retelling, was a shard, a sliver of the original event, reactivating itself through contact. By late 2023, physical changes began to emerge in those most affected. People who had studied the phenomenon too closely began to exhibit altered sleep cycles, migraines synchronized with the Schumann resonance intervals, sensitivity to engine frequencies, and in rare cases, changes in vocal pitch during REM sleep. One sleep clinic captured audio from a patient speaking in their dreams. When reversed, slowed, and cleaned, the phrase became unmistakable. "She left the door open. That's why it never ends." Among archivists, that line caused panic. Because that phrase, "she left the door open," had never appeared in any tape, transcript, or radio broadcast before. It wasn't part of the known fragments, which meant either the patient had created it or something new was entering the loop. At the same time, field researchers attempting to re-enter the Route 191 zone reported inexplicable failures. GPS units glitched, cameras refused to record. And those who pushed on described a feeling of being watched not from the side of the road, but from within the air itself. And then they would forget. The final hour of every journey near mile 213 erased, the dashcam footage corrupted, audio files reduced to static. But when played back through analog gear, reel-to-reel players, tube amplifiers, even turntables rigged for cassette, faint sounds could be recovered. One researcher captured it in a studio. The waveform looked normal, but when he boosted the mid-range and filtered out ambient hiss, he found a new voice beneath the voice. A whisper inside a whisper. It didn't ask for help. It didn't issue a warning. It simply said, "Turn the tape over." That was the part no one had tried. Because no one believed there was a second side. No one believed the road continued. But what if it does? What if every version of the tape was just one loop of something longer, something deeper, waiting for someone to flip the reel and press play again? Because somewhere beneath the asphalt, beneath memory, beneath language itself, something is still listening, waiting for the next signal, and once it hears it, it drives. On October 3rd, 2024, exactly 27 years after the original vehicle was found abandoned on Route 191, a maintenance worker at a remote Department of Transportation relay tower filed a routine damage report. High winds had knocked loose part of a transmission mast. What he found inside the exposed junction box, however, was not weather damage. It was a cassette, wedged between rusted cables, dry, intact, no label, just the number 003191, etched directly into the plastic with a hot pin. The worker turned it in without incident. The cassette was logged, photographed, and archived. But 3 days later, the worker was hospitalized with what the attending physician described as acute dissociative fugue. He'd driven 140 miles in the middle of the night without realizing it, eyes open, fully alert, yet with no memory of the trip. When questioned, he could only repeat one phrase: "I was just trying to finish the story." That same week, a low-frequency hum was recorded by an atmospheric research station in Nevada, identical to the 1997 spectrographic printout of the Route 191 tape. It lasted exactly 19 minutes and 13 seconds. When overlaid against a spectrogram of the original tape's waveform, the match was 94%. The anomaly had moved or spread. The final known piece of physical evidence came not from the desert, but from a flea market in Ohio. A rusted briefcase purchased for $5 by a collector contained a stack of old motel stationery, a hand-drawn map of northeastern Arizona, and a tape recorder. The recorder had no battery. It was cracked, useless. But when placed on a steel table in a recording studio, it emitted a faint mechanical clicking. The heads turning, as if it were trying to rewind. The cassette inside was marked "Return Side," and the map had a single line circled in red: Route 191, finish where you started. But there's no documented proof the tape was ever played, because every copy of the audio sent to digital backups arrived blank. No waveform, no signal, nothing. As if whatever was inside the tape could not be digitized. And that's when the deeper theory, the one no one wanted to say aloud, began to gain traction. That the cassette never held anything in the first place. It It was not a medium, it was a key, a ritual, a structure. That the act of listening, of remembering, was the mechanism. And every voice heard on the tape was not a victim, not a warning, but a recording in progress. That everyone who engaged with the signal, who heard the voice, who tried to trace its origin or write down the story, all of them became part of the content. Every listener another layer of magnetic imprint. Every retelling another loop. You're not hearing what happened. You're becoming part of the reason it happens again. Which means this story isn't over. Not because it never ended, but because you pressed play. And if the voice finds you, in static, in dreams, in the hiss of old tape, don't speak. Don't rewind. Don't ask questions, because it remembers. It knows when you're listening, and the moment you think you understand it, that's when the road begins again. Somewhere out in the desert, the air still vibrates. There is no closure, no epilogue, no truth. Only the sound of tires on gravel. Only the empty seat beside you. Only the hum that says, you never left. You're still driving, and the tape is still playing.